Hey guys, Lone here, and for this week's video, I am going to be talking about the Prismacolor Premiere Chisel Tip markers. Now, for those of you that don't know, Prismacolor has two different versions, one with a brush tip and then one with a chisel tip. So I'm going to share some tips and tricks of how to deal with certain issues that you may come across whenever you're working with these markers, or even generally any markers in general. But mostly I'm just going to be using the Prismacolor Premiere markers for this video. So let us get started. Now, before we get into working with markers, I'm going to cover some basics with inking. And for those of you who don't know, these are my personal opinions of what I'm going to be covering in this video, and obviously it can vary depending on artist to artist, so just keep that in mind. So the first thing that I want to cover is actually inking. And so, for example, we have a work in progress here that I have, and I've had now for a couple of weeks. So when I ink my drawings, whether they be with a Copic multiliner or even a Sakura Micron or any type of fine liner to be precise, I tend to let my lines sit on the paper for at least 24 hours. This is just my personal preference because I have had so many instances where my art has smudged because the paper has not completely kind of soaked up the ink. So I just tend to kind of let it sit for 24 hours. You don't have to do this if you want. I would say if you don't want to wait 24 hours to actually ink your image, I would then possibly recommend maybe an hour just to be on the safe side. It really depends on what type of paper you use, so be very knowledgeable in your paper. For this series, for this video, I plan on using the Canson XL mixed media paper because that is the paper that I prefer to use when dealing with markers. But like I said, just be aware of what type of paper you're using, and if you've never actually used that type of paper before, I would definitely recommend kind of experimenting and seeing how long it takes for your lines to dry. But I like to let it sit for 24 hours, but that's just me. So yeah. So now that we have that out of the way, I'm actually going to go over the differences between these two marker types, not brands, and show you guys the differences real quick between the two. Okay, so Prismacolor markers have come out with, or actually Prismacolor has come out with two different types of markers. There are the Prismacolor Premiere, and then you have the Prismacolor Premiere brush pens. So let's see if I can get it to stop rolling. There we go. So their first type of marker that they're more commonly known for is the Prismacolor Premiere markers. And they tend to, at least my set, look like this. I don't know if they've upgraded it since I've gotten my series of markers, but who knows. But regardless, this is what they are mostly known for. So on one side you have this nice broad chisel nib, which depending on the way that you hold it, you can get 4 different points, which can come in handy especially when you are working with either very large areas or very, very teeny areas. And they also come on the other side with a bullet tip. Now, depending on which version of the Prismacolor Premiere chisel tip markers you have, you can either have a bullet tip like this, or if you have a really old set, they have a tip that is essentially what I like to call a fine liner. Like, it really wasn't useful for anything except for maybe doing some really fine, teeny tiny work. So, and then they upgraded it to what I have. And then they also have the Prismacolor Premiere brush tip markers. Now for this, on one side, they have the brush tip. And on the other side, with this nifty little thing on here, so that it doesn't roll away, they have the bullet point tip. So they essentially got rid of the chisel tip, which kind of makes me sad because I like the chisel tip. And I will state this now, my kind of tips and tricks will not be dealing too much with the brush tips, and that is because I don't have very many of them, so I can't really demonstrate a lot of these techniques with the brush tips because I only have three of these brush tips. So I'm going to be covering everything with the Prismacolor Premiere Chisel tips. So if you own these, this will really help you. If you don't, I would say look around, and maybe eventually I can actually create a kind of tips and tricks for the brush tips. But I've noticed since my last Prismacolor video, a lot of people have been having issues with the chisel tips, so that's why I decided to make this video lean more towards chisel tips. So let us get started. Now the first thing I want to talk about when working with Prismacolor, or even any marker in general, is you have to be aware of the bleed space. And what I mean by bleed space is, say we have our nice, our nice little chisel tip here. And I would recommend a scratch piece of paper for this if you guys don't know what I'm talking about. So if you guys want to follow along, go ahead. But when you lay down marker, depending on the type of paper you have, it will spread a little bit. So one thing you want to make sure of, especially if you're afraid that your line art will smudge with the Copic, or not the Copic, but with the Prismacolor, is your bleed space. So let's just grab a multi-liner here. Alright, so I'm just going to make a little thing right here, kind of simulating hair, kind of like a point. If you don't want your stuff to smudge, make sure that you are aware of your marker's bleed space. Now this bleed space can depend on the type of paper that you use. So if you use a thinner paper, your marker will bleed out and cover more area than, say, a thirstier type of paper like Bristol. So you always want to make sure you practice, and this is definitely something that people need to get used to depending on their depending on the type of paper they use and all that. One thing you're going to notice is that I am actually not going near the line. Like, my marker is nowhere near the line when I set these lines down. So that I don't have to worry about my marker smudging. Oh, there's a little tiny dot. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. So I don't have to worry about my marker smudging my line work because I'm aware of how much bleed space this has. If you want to see a cheaper variety of marker that has a very interesting bleed space, I would actually recommend picking up a Sharpie. Sharpies are very good at showing you kind of what I'm talking about with a bleed space. So even if you can't see it right away with your Prismas, go ahead and pull out a Sharpie and try it out, and you'll see what I mean. The marker will kind of spread as you lay it down. So you always want to be aware of your bleed space. And yes, that is something that sadly you will have to practice because of your paper. And if you use a variety of papers, you're going to have to practice it to make sure that you are aware of what you are doing. So the only thing I can really recommend for that is to practice and make sure that you have a scrap piece of paper if you're not sure what kind of bleed space that your marker has. So yeah, scrap pieces of paper are awesome for this. Another thing people have issues with is smearing, so like smearing your line art. So I'm going to attempt to actually smear my line art here. So I have no idea if this is going to work. So wish me luck, guys, wish me luck. We'll grab an uni pen. I don't know, I'm just picking one. And I'm going to lay down a little bit of ink. I'm not even going to let it dry. Make sure I have a scrap piece of... Yeah, I got some scrap piece of paper here. Whoop. But see how it smears like that? I got to clean my marker tip now. Sorry. But this is an issue that happens when you don't let your ink dry. So one way that you can kind of correct this is to actually let your ink sit and dry. Don't immediately ink it and then erase at it, because erasing can cause smearing, especially if your ink hasn't dried, or even laying down marker. If you use a light box on your freshly laid down ink, can make it smear. So one good thing to do is actually just let it sit. So if you just let it sit, that'll help correct it. And then say, I don't know, we'll use this brush pen because I can't find my regular. Woo! Right? So let's see if I can get the... Yeah, it's smearing onto my brush pen. So I'm going to see if I can get it to smear a little bit. Yeah. But say you have a light color like eggshell. Right? It's really light. It's really near the line. What you can do is you can take a white Jelly Roll pen, and if it smears too much, or if it's like on the face, you can just go down the line, and depending on how steady your hand is, you can actually cover up that smearing a little bit with a white gel pen and kind of add a little bit of pop to your image as well. So that is one way to actually correct smearing, especially if you have a lighter color, because white Jelly Roll pens, when being used, don't tend to pop out nearly as much with a white gel pen. Another thing you can do as well is when you go to scan your image, you can actually, depending on the type of photo editing software you have, you can go ahead and use the clone tool and correct it up digitally. So you don't necessarily have to scrap an image just because it smears just a tiny bit. You just have to be aware of what you can do, even if it is with a bit of a digital touch. Another issue that people tend to have, especially when they start out with using Prismacolors, is streaking. And so we're going to pull out the chisel tip because more people have issues getting it to blend correctly with a chisel tip than with a brush nib, because I guess brush nibs tend to make it a little easier. So streaking, actually, you know, we'll use a different color. We'll use this nice lovely blue. But streaking tends to happen like that. I don't know if you guys can really see it, but if you look, you'll notice that it kind of overlaps. Now, as you can see, when I tend to use my chisel tips, I don't lift up my nib at all. I just go back and forth and it creates a better coverage. Another thing you can do that'll help reduce streaking as well is to actually go in a circular motion. And this looks like it's about to die. Yay! It means I have to refill. But you can also go ahead and do it in a circular motion. Now, if you get an issue like this, where it's not laying down evenly when you're doing the circular motions, it means one of two things. Mostly one thing. let's be honest. And that is your marker is dying. So you're going to either have to go out and buy a new marker, or if you wish to risk it, you can go and actually refill your Prismacolor markers with some rubbing alcohol. And I do have a tutorial, which I believe linked down below, as to how you can refill your Prismacolor Premiere colored markers. But yes, the key to being able to blend correctly, and we'll put this aside since this is dying, so it makes it a little harder to get it to blend, is to just not pick up your nib. If you don't pick up your nib as you're working, it won't, see, these are old, but it won't smear or streak as much. And even if it does, say for example, we use eggshell, right? Oop, wrong end. And it still smudges, right? That you can cover up after you've done all of your shading with another layer of your base coat, and that will tend to even it out and also help to blend your marker. So hopefully that's a little bit of a helper for you guys when working with Prismacolor Premieres or any type of chisel tip marker. Alright guys, so for the last thing I'm going to show you, I will be talking about blending. So a tip that I have for blending, especially if you want to do it fast, is to actually have all of your tips facing up towards, I don't know, your desk. The reason for that is because it'll be easier to grab the marker you need, be able to take the cap off, because you'll pick it up, take the cap off, bam, your chisel tip will be right there. So without further ado, I'm just gonna blend some very quick skin colors in. Sorry for the noise in the background. My brother's birthday is tonight, so he's partying, I guess. I don't know. So without further ado, I'm just gonna show you kind of how to blend without it looking really bad, or if it does look bad, how you can kind of repair it. So first we're going to lay down a really quick layer of eggshell. Mind you, these are all just skin colors. Then I'm going to put down some brick beige. Figured it's easier to do it this way. And then to blend that out a little bit, we're going to pull out the eggshell and blend that in a little bit. Then I'm going to pull out blush pink, or light peach, sorry. Light peach. You can also pull up blush pink, that's another good color to use. And then whoop, blend that out with the brick beige. And then finally, take the light tan, put that right there. Once again, kind of cover it up with some light peach. But as you can see, with them all facing the same direction, it makes it very easy to blend them, because you literally have the tip right there for you to use. And as you can see, I'm going back to my lightest color in reverse, so it makes it very easy to kind of blend this all out. And then if you want, and this is optional, but if you want it to be even more blended, you can always just go right over it with your base color, and bam, you have a blended picture. Now I will state that I am unable to do over blending on this paper, and I have tried very hard to make this paper become oversaturated and muddy, and for some reason my paper just won't do that. And no matter how many times I have tried to make it muddy, it just won't happen. So I really hope that these tips help those out that are just starting out with Prismacolor colored pencils, or why colored pencils? Sorry, it's really late, it's midnight. Prismacolor markers with the chisel tips. So I hope that this helped you out, and yeah, so next week I will be starting my Watercolor Month. So I'm going to give you guys a little sneak peek on that real quick, and that is this. This, once I'm done with it, because I'm not quite done with it, will be watercolored. So stay tuned for that for next week's video, because all next month I will be working with watercolor. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Check out some of my other links down below in the description, and check out the last video that I did, which was my Halloween picture. And I hope that you guys have an awesome day. And for those of you celebrating Halloween, be safe out there with your trick-or-treating and partying and all that. And for everybody else who doesn't celebrate trick-or-treating or Halloween, have a great day. And I will see you in my next video. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.